Are you struggling to come up with topic ideas week after week after week? Whether you do a podcast, write blog posts, or need to pitch ideas to pick up writing gigs, there is nothing more demoralizing than staring at a blank screen and not being able to come up with any useful ideas. Now, I know that feeling all too well. I'm a podcaster, a business owner, and a writer, and my podcasts are published weekly. I send out regular email newsletters to 3 different audiences, and I write the occasional blog post. So coming up with ideas to talk or write about used to be one of the toughest challenges I faced when it came to consistently creating content. So today, I want to share with you a method I discovered and how I've combined that method with my own process that I'd already developed, because both of those things together have made it so much easier to come up with ideas for topics. And not just any old topic, but things that are really relevant and helpful for my audiences. Welcome to the Online Business Launchpad podcast. I'm your host, Trudy Rankin, and I bring you stories, tips, and advice from online entrepreneurs who are finding success in what they do, because if we've done it, so can you. I've been running my own online business for 9 years now and counting, and I've had lots of practice learning what to do and what not to do to achieve my goals. And because of what I've been through, I've become passionate about helping overworked and overwhelmed online business owners like you pick up new skills and techniques so you can grow your business without burning out or having to hire a big team. I've used my experience and the experience of others to help hundreds of people grow their online business. And I love working with people who, because of life circumstances, need a flexible work from home or work from anywhere option that helps them pay the bills. And my mission is simple. I want to help you solve the challenges you face as a far too busy online business owner so you can have more time and more money for yourself and your family and more choices in how you live your life. So if you're ready to, once again, dive into how to come up with topics to talk or write about, then let's get cracking. Okay, so let's get past the obvious bits about coming up with topics. First, you have to know who you're talking to or writing for. Otherwise, what is the point? Secondly, it helps a lot if you know what those people are interested in. And thirdly, you need to know whether you're helping them solve a problem or fulfill a desire. And once you have clarity on those things, it's time for the next step. And as I go through this next step, I'm going to do it wearing my podcaster, newsletter writer, and blog post writer hats. Now, when I was relatively new to the world of online business and content creation, I used to just pick whatever was top of mind or had caught my attention, and I'd write something about that. However, I've learned over time that I get much better results if my topics are tied back to an overarching theme or a strategy, a specific goal, if you like, for why I'm writing in the first place, or talking about something in the first place. For example, when I write newsletters for the menopauseeffect.com email list, I'm specifically focusing on topics that are related to perimenopause or menopause and how to deal with the challenges that come with recognizing and coping with the many myriad ways that menopause can affect people. When I'm writing for my freelancewritersonline.com email list, I'm focusing on topics that are going to encourage, inform, and help new and emerging writers get paid for their writing. And for my online business liftoff.com email list, I share my experiences and what I've learned as an online business owner about building my online business, what's gone right and what didn't with the various projects that I run. Now, you might think that those 3 audiences are completely different, and in some respects they are. However, it is entirely possible to be someone who is going through menopause, who is also a writer, and who wants to build their writing into a sustainable online business. So as I explain my process for coming up with topics, I want you to think about how you could take the principles I'm sharing and apply them to your own target audience. So my process. There are 3 phases to my process of coming up with topics. Now, sometimes these 3 phases can happen quite quickly, one right after the other, and sometimes there can be time gaps between them as I think about where I want to take a particular article or podcast episode so that I can achieve a specific goal with it. So Let's pretend for a moment that I've decided I want to write a nonfiction blog post about something historical, something that's happened in the past. Now, this is not so far-fetched as it sounds. Back in ancient times when my children were small, I used to write nonfiction articles and I used to get paid for it. And believe it or not, I majored in history at university my first time around. Now, obviously, if an editor has already asked you to write a piece, you're going to want to write about what they want. Or if you're a guest on someone's podcast, they'll have specific ideas for what they want to cover off in your interview. So for the purposes of this example, let's just assume that I'm going to come up with my own topic for this nonfiction history blog post and then pitch the idea to an editor. So the very first thing I do when trying to come up with topics these days, especially for my podcast, but also for my newsletters and blog posts, is to use something I learned from Kevin Schmidlin from Grow the Show podcast. And he had an episode 163, where he talks about how to come up with endless ideas for solo podcast episodes. He calls it the calendar review method, but the acronym that he uses when he explains his method is PQRS. And so that's what's stuck in my head. It's like alphabet soup. And basically the method involves sitting down at the end of the week with your calendar and your notes or your journal from the week. And as you review the meetings in your calendar, plus any notes you've taken, you're going to be looking for problems you've helped solve or had solved for you, questions that your clients or customers have asked you, any realizations you've arrived at, and any stories you've lived through. So PQRS, P for problem solved, Q for questions asked, R for realizations or aha moments arrived at, and S for stories about things that have happened to you during the week. Now, it is such a useful way of starting the process of choosing a topic. Shout out to Kevin. It's just been really helpful to me. And so when I go through this technique, I like to use a 2x2 grid and write one of those PQRS words in each grid. And what I very quickly discovered is that as I do the review and write down the things that fit in each grid, is that a common thread is going to pop out for the week. Something quite meaty and chunky that I know is going to be helpful if I talk or write about it. Now, for phase two, so that was the phase one of the process. For phase two of this process, I narrowed down this topic by asking myself a few questions. And it may help if you think of these questions in terms of a Venn diagram, the one where there's at least 3 intersecting circles and there's a sweet spot in the center where they all overlap and solve all the world's problems and world hunger and all that. But anyway, Venn diagrams are really, really helpful. So in this example, circle 1 would ask and answer the question, what's the PQRS topic that you chose out of your weekly calendar review? So whatever topic thread you've picked should still be phrased in quite general terms. You don't want to nail the topic down completely just yet. And then circle 2 could ask and answer the question, what's your focus? Do you want to make the main focus of what you write about or talk about people, places, things, or events? Now, oftentimes I'll choose to write about people because I find them fascinating. Ordinary people can live such extraordinary lives and we don't even know it. So, for example, when I was at university, I used to live next door to an elderly gentleman who would pay me to do odd jobs around his yard. And he had a really, really strong German accent, and he didn't seem to have any family around. He never talked about his family. But despite his age, every morning he used to put on an old pair of army boots and go jogging. And because I have a fairly active imagination, I used to secretly wonder whether he was an ex-German soldier from World War II who had chosen to rebuild his life somewhere else after the war. And to this day, I wished I'd asked him about his past and why he went jogging in army boots. The most uncomfortable things you could imagine. Okay, next circle 3, will answer the question, ask and answer the question, do I want to cover things from a local, regional, national, or global perspective? Now, this is an important question because it can hugely widen or narrow the scope of your topic. So, for example, with a global perspective, you could ask what life is like for ex-soldiers who move to other countries to try to rebuild their lives after fighting. And then you could technically add in a 4th circle and ask yourself whether there is anything happening in current events that's interesting or worrisome or create synergies when combined with the answers to your first 3 questions. So you could have 4 circles in your Venn diagram if you want. So if we stick with our current example of my elderly neighbor, there are plenty of wars and regional struggles going on in the world at the moment. So what will happen when that struggle's over? What might impact on the lives of all those ex-soldiers, and what will they do after that struggle's over? Okay, so let's quickly review where my example blog post topic has gotten to. My PQRS exercises from the last 2 weeks has highlighted a common problem that my husband and I go through every year. And that is, well, both of us always, and I'm not kidding, it is always, we always forget our wedding anniversary. We both do it, and I have no idea why. We've been married for 40 years, so you'd think anniversaries would be a big deal, but nope, it just slips out of our consciousness like water into sand. So that problem goes into circle 1 as a general note about forgetfulness when it comes to important family dates like anniversaries, which makes asking and answering the question about the focus for circle 2, people, places, things, events, really easy to do. It's a mix of people and supposedly important family-based events. Now, next, in asking and answering our question for circle 3, which was local, regional, national, global, in my example, we're focusing on local or maybe even at the family level. Okay, now we're ready to finish the second phase, and we do this by narrowing down the topic even more by observing how each of the Venn diagram circles intersects with the others. So let's dive a bit deeper by asking questions that start to hone in on different aspects of the topic as it's been narrowed down so far. So keeping in mind our nonfiction blog post example, I'd ask, is there a relevant watershed moment in my own life that would be helpful to share that relates to this partially formed topic? So talking about personal experiences is a great way of finding a topic and then introducing it to your readers. And the answer, as we apply it to our sample topic, our example topic, the answer to that question is pretty simple. My husband and I have now accumulated 40 years worth of oopses when it comes to remembering our anniversary on the exact day. And we do remember it a week later or whatever, but on the exact day, we always forget. Or what about a watershed moment in someone else's life? For example, when I was a child, my father's parents lived with us for a number of years, and I thought my granddad was the most fascinating person ever. He used to sing folk songs, which I loved, and he used to play pranks on people, which I did not love. But the watershed moments in his life were really, really sad. Both of his parents were dead from the flu by the time he was 7. So he'd been farmed out to a physically abusive uncle. And by the time he was 14, he was living alone and supporting himself, which meant that even though he loved learning, he never got past the 6th grade because he had to work to live. And think about how many nonfiction historical topics could come out of that short watershed moment synopsis. Another question worth asking is, what event has or is still shaping the world or the world around me? So there's plenty more we could all say about COVID, even if we're sick of hearing about it ourselves, and plenty of unique angles to choose from. You know, the personal angle, how did it affect you or your family? The community angle, how did it affect a particular town? An economic angle, how did it affect the things you can buy now? Or even a future history angle, what will be the long-term impact on the children who started school during COVID and had to do all that learning from home? And then I like this next question. Can you identify an event that shaped history and then identify a small thing about that event that if it had been changed, history would now be completely different? So, for example, what if I hadn't chosen to take a year off university to do volunteer work? What would my life be like now? Well, for one thing, I would have never met my husband. So for me, it's true that this particular question is probably more likely to generate fiction. You know, I always think of movies like Sliding Doors or The Man in the High Castle when I ask these what if questions. So I usually tend not to go there, but you could always then ask, well, what about people who didn't take a year off university? Did their lives turn out to be appreciably different to mine? And finally, my favorite question for finding topics at this stage is, what's something I've seen or read recently that makes me go, I wonder? Things like headstones in a cemetery, or something that I've seen while I'm traveling, or a road sign, or something that somebody says. So by the time you get to this part of the process, you'll find that you've been able to narrow the topic down a little more and a little more until you finally have a specific, clear, very interesting topic. So let me give you another example. Shahan, somebody that I used to coach, writes about history in his blog, throughouthistory.com. And that's all one word, throughouthistory.com. But he writes about history only as it intersects with antiques, especially antique pens or things made out of silver, and or his family's Chinese, Malaysian, Peranakan cultural background, which is really, really, really interesting. So why is it interesting? Well, for me, it's interesting because the Peranakan culture developed when Han Chinese men, usually traders, traveled to and intermarried with Javanese, Sumatran, and Malayan women, and they developed this very, very distinct culture that exists to this day. It's changed somewhat, but it's still a very distinct culture. And so you take that culmination of things that Shahan writes about, so that's the more generalized topic, which is history, plus the lenses he uses, antiques and culture, silver, some variations on that. Well, it gives Shahan pretty much an infinite number of things to write about without him having to stare at a blank screen for ages and then give up. And for the example we've been using for the nonfiction historical topic, I'm starting to narrow in on the impact that deaths from the flu back in the early 1900s might be having on today's society. Have we learned anything that we might be able to apply in the future as we learn more about the long-term impacts of COVID on society? And more importantly, can I blame the 2 early deaths of my great-grandparents on my inability to remember my anniversary? Okay, so now it's time to move to the last stage of the topic selection process. And that's the shaping part. I think of this third part of the process as shaping the final nuances of the topic. And I do that by asking why. Why do other people want to know about certain topics? I know why I'm interested, but why are they curious about those topics in particular? Now, when I was in the 5th and 6th grade, I had a teacher who used to read to us every day for half an hour after a lunch break or a recess. And what he read shaped my interests for years to come. Now, granted, the stories he read were fiction or kind of semi-biographical fiction, but it was fiction set in real events, historical events that had shaped the country that I lived in, and they were often about what it was like to live through a war as a child, and I was hooked. So after raptly listening to a book entitled Johnny Tremaine, which is about a young teenage boy in the American Revolution, and another book called Across 5 Aprils, which was about a young teenage boy in the American Civil War, I later went on to devour nonfiction historical accounts of World War II, books like The Ultra Secret, The Man Who Never Was, and countless other sort of war-related books. And that led to me, as I mentioned earlier, majoring in history when I went to university. And believe me, it was so much more fun and interesting than calculus, just let me tell you right now. My point is, if you think about the reason other people are interested in specific topics, it makes it much easier to pick topics that evoke surprise for the reader, drive home a truth they've newly grasped, provide a mystery to mull over, or maybe they were topics that were front page news years ago and now people are curious about exactly why they were news back then. And lastly, when you think about potential topics from someone else's point of view, you can now ask what things might be obvious to you, either from their presence or their absence, that aren't so obvious to others. In other words, where are the gaps in the story? What are those gaps, and who wants to know what they are and why the gaps exist? Curiosity is the key to it all. It is the key to finding topics that you are going to be interested and other people are going to be interested in. So if you engage your sense of curiosity, you're going to find it so much easier to come up with topics. And knowing what you're interested in yourself helps, a ton. I've said that before. I'm going to say it again. What you're interested in is going to help you pick topics. So there you have it. That's my process for coming up with topics. I use the PQRS, problem, question, realization, story method to choose a general topic. I shape the topic further by asking questions and then visually showing those answers with a Venn diagram. And lastly, I add in nuance to the topic by thinking about in what way others might be interested in that same topic. What questions would they want to have answered in a nonfiction historical blog post? Now, you might be wondering why I don't just go straight to the search engines or a platform like answerthepublic.com and pop in keywords and keyword phrases. Well, it's because in order to do that, you have to already know which keywords and phrases to use, which means you need to know what topic to research. And then we're back at square one. What's the topic that we want to research? So we've just gone in a big circle. So hence my three-stage Venn diagram type approach combined with a bunch of curiosity-based questions and my PQRS lovely method that I learned from Kevin Schmedlin. Now, I hope that you found that useful. If you have questions or thoughts on this process for choosing topics, please feel free to get in touch with me on LinkedIn. I'll put the link to my profile in the show notes, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. And that's it for today's episode. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to help make the podcast even better, I would really, really appreciate it if you could leave an honest review over on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen, because those reviews help others find the show and decide if it's going to be useful for them on their own entrepreneurial journey. And be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. I've got some more great guests and topics lined up that are going to inspire you and help you level up your online business game. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll catch you the next time on the Online Business Launchpad podcast. If you're a longtime listener to the Online Business Launchpad podcast, you'll know that I often talk about Pat Flynn's SPI Pro community. Now, what you might not know is that I'm a founding member of that community. And every year I keep signing up because I get so much value out of it. For example, every month I meet with a mastermind group whose members are at the same spot on the entrepreneurial journey as I am. And we celebrate our wins and navigate challenges together. And if we want to chat in between meetings, we just easily jump into the space that's reserved just for our mastermind and just say whatever's on our mind. It's a really supported space where we all keep growing in confidence and capabilities, knowing that someone or several someones have got our back. And that's not all the value I get from being part of the SPI Pro community. I have access to really relevant trainings that Pat has put together. Plus, I've connected with several amazing guests for my podcast, experts who shared invaluable insights with my audience. And the opportunities just keep coming. I've had the honor of being on Pat Flynn's own podcast and even teaching other SPI Pro members about some of the things that I'm expert in. And being a part of the SPI Pro community, it's like having my own special group of advisors that I can reach out to anytime I need them. Imagine having that network at your fingertips, where every connection inspires and every interaction teaches something new. That's what SPI Pro is all about for me. It's more than a community. It's a place where we as entrepreneurs come together to push the boundaries of what we can achieve. So are you ready to be part of something bigger? To learn, share, and grow alongside fellow business owners who are just as driven as you? Check it out for yourself and see for yourself the difference a truly collaborative community can make. And if you'd like to use my affiliate link to sign up, go to onlinebusinessliftoff.com/SPI-Pro. If you do, I'll receive a small commission at no extra cost to you, for which I thank you. And once you're in the community, say hello, and I'll be delighted to show you around. So join me in the SPI Pro community, and let's reach new heights together. Once again, that's onlinebusinessliftoff.com/SPI-Pro. And we'll see you there.